Most people think manipulation looks obvious, a liar, a scammer, a dictator screaming into a microphone. Welcome to this final explainer, where we're going to dive into why the absolute most dangerous manipulation you will ever face never actually looks dangerous.
We naturally assume we can spot a trap, right? Because we expect it to look threatening. We expect bad logic to just wave a giant red flag in our faces.
But here's the thing. Real manipulation rarely arrives looking dangerous. It arrives looking intelligent, compassionate, scientific, moral, popular. And that right there is exactly why it works.
So today, we're mapping this all out. We're moving from the isolated components to reasoning, emotion, authority, and finally, how they all combine into this massive persuasion machine. And most importantly, how you can actually survive it.
Let's start by looking back at the components we've been dissecting piece by piece over the last 12 weeks.
We covered it all. Week 1, false cause and generalization. Week 2, circular reasoning. Week 4, slippery slopes. Week 7, emotional appeals. Week 10, manufactured expertise. Week 12, selective truth. But honestly, I have a confession to make. This entire course kind of hid something from you. These were never isolated tricks. They were components. Because real-world persuasion doesn't just attack you through one single weakness. It attacks through all of them. First up, let's deconstruct logos, or reasoning, and look at how our actual thought processes get completely distorted.
Take a classic argument you might see from a health influencer online. Smartphones increased, anxiety increased. Therefore, smartphones caused anxiety. It's this super clean illusion. It feels intuitively true, right? But the messy reality is that during that exact same timeline, diagnosis rates changed, awareness shifted, social isolation increased, the economy fluctuated, and sleep patterns completely altered. Oversimplifying interacting variables creates a false sense of logic that is dangerously easy for us to believe. Now let's move to pathos. This is where emotion steps in and completely overrides our analytical brain.
Human emotion is incredibly fast. And fear? Fear is the fastest. Consider catastrophizing. You'll hear fear-based news outlets say things like, if this trend continues, society could collapse within years. Well, why do they do that? Because fear forcefully narrows our analytical bandwidth. It literally forces your brain to prioritize threat detection over nuance. When you are terrified, you completely stop looking for the messy reality.
And corporate moral advertising works in exactly the same way. A brand says, our company stands for justice. By using this kind of moral grandstanding, a corporation emotionally attaches itself to virtue. It frames the narrative so that if you dare to question the company, you feel like you are questioning justice itself. It's a brilliantly effective shield. Which brings us to our third pillar, ethos. This is how credibility and identity control what we believe. Ask yourself this. Who are you afraid to disagree with? When someone says, well, come on, everyone knows that already, they aren't citing a fact. They are relying entirely on social punishment logic. As human beings, we fear social exclusion far, far more than we fear being factually wrong. So we naturally let the authority of the crowd override our own critical thinking. And this brings us to the core of it all, the persuasion machine. What happens when these systems are fully integrated? This is what it looks like when they all attack at once. A statistic appears. Crime increased 40%. Okay, that sounds logical. But then comes the emotional story. A family lost their child. Now comes the expert panel. Leading analysts agree immediate action is necessary. And finally, the trap snaps shut. If you disagree, you clearly do not care about public safety. Did you notice what just happened there? Logic was used. Emotion was used. Authority was used. Logos, pathos, and ethos. All at the exact same time. This is why modern persuasion feels so overwhelming. Because you aren't just arguing against facts, you're arguing against social belonging, fear, identity, status, morality, and emotional survival simultaneously. You see this play out every single day online. A clip goes viral, context disappears, influencers react emotionally, experts are selectively quoted, the audience joins the outrage. Nuance becomes suspicious, questions become dangerous, and suddenly, a complete persuasion ecosystem forms in a matter of hours. Most people think propaganda depends on stupidity. Let me tell you, it does not. It depends entirely on cognitive overload. Literally, no human being can independently verify every statistic, every expert, every emotional reaction, every historical claim, and every narrative frame that hits their feed.
It is physically impossible. So, if we are constantly overloaded, how do we actually survive this ecosystem? We survive by understanding our own cognitive constraints. Because we can't process everything, the brain has to take shortcuts, and manipulation directly exploits those shortcuts. Fear reduces nuance, anger simplifies complexity, group belonging suppresses doubt, and authority completely reduces scrutiny. Repetition creates a familiarity that is powerful enough to resemble truth. We are forced to take shortcuts, and systems structurally exploit them to maintain psychological stability over actual truth.
And you know what the frightening part is? Every single system uses these tools. Politics, media, corporations, activist groups, universities, religions, influencers, even education itself. A teacher uses authority. A classroom uses social pressure. Grades create an emotional consequence. Even this very explainer utilizes structure and pacing to influence your belief. No system stands completely outside of persuasion.
So what was the point of all of this? It wasn't about becoming emotionless. It wasn't about becoming a cynic. And it certainly wasn't just about learning how to win arguments online. The goal was learning to notice, becoming an observer, noticing when logic is being distorted, when emotion is completely replacing analysis, and when identity is being used to shut down your thought. To do that, you need to equip yourself with these 3 ultimate defensive questions. Logic asks, does this actually make sense? Pathos asks, how does this piece of information make me feel? And ethos asks, who am I afraid to disagree with right now?
Because manipulation only succeeds when all 3 of those stop being questioned at the same time. The trap only snaps shut when logic, emotion, and authority are accepted blindly and simultaneously.
Which leaves us with this final, profound revelation. Perhaps the most dangerous manipulation is not the one that feels oppressive, but the one that feels like common sense, moral responsibility, social belonging, and intellectual certainty all at once. When you feel all of those simultaneously, well, that is exactly when you need to start asking questions. Thank you for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious and keep observing.